candidly, my ex-husband said, you can never tell anybody that this is who you are.
That's Shannon Flanagan, who gets real about what it means to bring your full self to work while living with bipolar.
Welcome back to the Corporate Detox, the podcast where we talk about work, ambition, and life in and after corporate. Because mi gente, we needed this. It's me, Elisa, longtime marketing expert and your favorite corporate escape artist.
I first met Shannon at Shop Talk a few years ago, and honestly, I thought we'd spend most of our time talking about retail. I mean, she had spent decades in leadership roles across companies like Gap, Macy's, Accenture, Slalom, was building her own nonprofit, Retail Women in Tech. And we did, maybe for 5 minutes. Then we got onto this topic of the stories we don't tell, the parts of ourselves we've learned to edit, depending on who's in the room. For Shannon, that conversation would eventually lead us here to living with bipolar, to deciding whether sharing something so personal at work was worth the risk, to what happens when she finally did, and to the role leaders play in creating an environment where people feel safe and understood enough to be honest, and to a question that felt familiar to both of us. What parts of ourselves have we learned to hide?
My parents didn't grow up well off. I grew up in inner city New York, and I went to boarding school. And I was told before it, you can't share your story. You'll make people uncomfortable in boarding school. So that stood out to me. I'm wondering for you, what were the words that stood out to you?
I felt that I was a hypocrite. A gentleman was sitting next to me, and he raised his hand because the topic was all about bringing our authentic self to work. And this was one of those organizations that was very forward in trying to celebrate that concept of bringing your authentic self to work, to the tune of that, having posters of those types of things, right, all over the office. And he raised his hand and said, I don't believe I can be my authentic self at work. He had grown up in Compton, and it came from a very different background than 99% of the people that sat around him and he worked with. He said, I feel like I have to be very edited, right? In my language, in my speech, I have to hide the past that I had. That moment changed my life. Following the session, I pulled him aside and we snuck into one of the small conference rooms. And I said, I think I'm not bringing my authentic self to work. And this had been something top of mind for me for the couple of years prior. But sitting down with this man, I said, I do want to share my stories. This is a few months before Mental Health Awareness Month, which is in May. And we decided to put together a program for the entire country because there was not one that existed. And it was going to be sharing our stories because he too had a mental health story to share that was different than mine. What was really interesting in that conversation is this organization was younger and again considered itself very progressive, but HR and legal almost stopped us. There was a lot of concern that by sharing our stories that would open up discussions they weren't prepared for, that we're a protected class. And what did that look like? And what did that mean? So we hit hurdles. Now, we shared more than they had wanted us to share when the session finally came to play. And the session that we built for the organization was grounded in building awareness and education and sharing the stories that a panel of us had. There were several of us who decided to be very brave and share our stories. What I found equally as interesting is that I decided to go share my story to the leadership team in advance so that they understood who I was and they weren't blindsided. And again, given the nature of my diagnosis, it comes with a lot of stigma. And following sharing my story, the majority of them reached out. A handful of them, I guess maybe there was about 12 of them, I guess, in that room. A handful actually sat down and either shared their own story or the story of their sons or their wives, and we cried. And there were a couple who never spoke to me again. And it was a little scary, to be honest. Now, I share it in the book, but that's much easier, right? And it's set in a context of a whole bunch of other things. But my son shares this with me. Hypocrisy is unacceptable to me and as a value to be consistent. Couple that with the importance of having this discussion. There are so many more people who experience it than we talk about, but everyone knows someone. And one of the things that I thought was really, you always have to find, the silver lining of the dark clouds of COVID was that it opened up the conversation around mental health. And so many people experienced what I call episodic depression or anxiety, or even if you wanted to use the situational, where somebody like me, this is a lifelong condition, which is a very different orientation to have. But I think the sympathy, the empathy, the compassion for those of us who do struggle, frankly, every day with what we have was shifted. And I think we can see that in a lot of the reports that are coming out around mental health acceptance in the workplace. So that's great news, but we still have a long way to go.
Now, what surprised me about preparing for this episode was realizing how many people are affected by mental health and how rarely we talk about that at work. Roughly 1 in 5 Americans have a mental health condition. Bipolar alone affects upwards of 5 million Americans. And I kept thinking about what that actually means in real life. That on any given Zoom call, in any meeting, in any room, there's a very real chance someone is carrying that quietly. And you would never know. Would you have known that with Shannon?
I was 16, I was diagnosed with situational depression. Now, that'll make a lot of sense when we fast forward to the actual diagnosis. In my 20s, diagnosed with ADHD, took medication, was really able to learn and develop new coping skills. And then with pregnancy, came off that medication. And it started a series, though, in my 30s of trying different medications. All I can say for that is a really, really hard one, right? To find what's right for you. And in my journey of finding what's right for me actually caused an episode such that I got my diagnosis. This has happened at 38. It is bipolar type 2 and ADHD. I think ADHD is widely known, and I had actually stopped taking any medication for that for almost 20 years. And add insult to injury, am perimenopausal, and it is very common. That's its own podcast. So I'll give.
Look at the fifth topic we have.
It's one of the books I want to write about.
Okay, yeah.
But it's really common that mental health conditions are accelerated, right, or come more to the forefront during perimenopause. So it's actually something that I've more recently looked back at and decided that I actually needed treatment about. But let me explain a little bit more about bipolar type 2. It sits on the mood disorder spectrum. So ADHD is more the neurodivergent, right, class. Then you have generalized depression and anxiety. In the world of mood disorders, the society, I think, more understands bipolar type 1. And there are very big differences between the two. So type 1 is high mania, and mania is when people are making very irresponsible decisions around, it could be sex, money, doing very destructive behaviors, and often not even knowing that they're doing them. And not everybody has significant depression when they have type 1. And type 1, what they're trying to treat with medication is the mania, because that's what's destructing people's lives. Also in type 1, the cycles are much longer. Somebody will be in a state of mania for 6 months to a year, and then they'll be out of it, maybe in a depressive state for 6 months to a year. It's what we typically see presented in TVs and in movies. If you think about type 2, there are very different factors to it. One is which that the cycles are very much faster. They're typically happening every couple of months, or someone like myself, which has rapid cycling. So I am up and down throughout a week. Secondly, the depression is the issue. When you're in type 2, you'll have what's called hypomania, where the rest of the world just thinks you're flying high in a great mood. You are getting a lot more done. You're not making poor decisions. But my ex-husband used to say, I can tell when you're in that state because you don't care about anybody else. The depression is the bigger issue, and that's what the medication is solving. I don't know if this is still true, but at one time I did read a couple of reports that said type 2 is the highest rate of suicide. And the reason being is that people go in to get treated for the depression. They're given SSRIs, SSRIs make things worse. They come off the SSRI, it triggers a hypomania state, which then triggers a depressive state. So many people don't understand that. And that's what I went through until I finally got the right diagnosis. The way I describe bipolar type 2 is we feel feelings intensely, which ADHD also comes with that. But I feel the highs really high and the lows really low. And that is one of the things that is beautiful about what it gives and what I can give back to the world as a result of that. But it's also the thing that can be very challenging for me to navigate through the day-to-day highs and lows of life.
So here you're seeing two, no pun intended, bipolar things coupled together. You're trying to reconcile it. You treat one thing, you're dulling the other. The people who, when you shared your stories, some did respond, some shunned you. Did you expect who was in each bucket?
Now, I would say one of them I was not surprised who shunned.
Okay.
She ended up being the person who let me go. So that was always a head scratcher. It could have just been coincidence, though I do think that filter was applied.
Yeah.
And I believe where the filter gets applied when I do share it is that I think I do show up differently in the world. I always have, right? I have a ton of energy. I'm very authentic. I think really fast. I connect dots really quickly, highly empathetic. So once the diagnosis is understood, I should say, heard by someone else, I think then that filter is applied. And some of those things that become some of my greatest assets are now seen in a negative light, right?
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to ask. How did it show up at work? What were the things that were said in a performance review?
The primary thing that I typically received is that I'm not focused. Again, this is a benefit. And normally our greatest assets are also the things that we need to work on the most. And I will say every personality test I've ever taken, I'm an extreme, which is a reflection, I think, of, again, the feelings that I have. But because the way my brain works, I take in almost all inputs that are happening around me. Thankfully, I can organize them very quickly because I see the interrelatedness of things. But bringing that consciousness to an organization, saying, you want me to focus in on this one thing, but this one thing is related to 10 other things, and this one thing cannot be done without these 10 other things happening, right? Because I'm also very causal in the way that I think would be perceived as not having focus. It is true, I focus on 100 things, and that remains to be an issue. Anybody who wanted to look at my computer would see that I have 6 different Google profiles, and on each tab have anywhere from 50 to 80 tabs open. That's what my brain is like. So that was one component. The other one is that I don't listen. And this is actually a challenge in my personal relationship with my fiance. One of the coping mechanisms I learned to bring into conversations, especially with those who have very different personalities, was to say, one, I'm going off on a tangent, right? When my brain was going to start creating all of these interrelatedness, connecting all these dots that weren't maybe relevant to the conversation by some. And 2, to let them know I am listening and that I'm building upon. So when I'm interacting with people whose brains think as fast as mine does, in retail, it's usually a little bit of an easier fix. I will tell you, working with tech was where this really got accentuated as an issue. But I am listening so much, and I'm trying to build and make it better. But that also can result in interrupting, which is considered very rude by a lot of people and perceived then that you're not listening. So those 2 have been the biggest ones, and they're ones that I still actively have to work on, but try to mitigate.
Right. I love that you just said that what makes you great, your superpower, is also your Achilles heel, right? Take me back to one of these moments where these two very opposing characteristics in your life.
I used to say that I could not only just connect the dots, but I understood the connective tissue between those. And, if you're at any of the retailers, right, you've got a marketing function that's focused on marketing and one that's, merchandising and planning, whatever it is. But what What would continue to happen was the stay in your lane conversation. That's not a problem we need to solve right now, Shannon. I would hear that repeatedly. And I operate in a mind of the 5 whys, right? How do you get to the root of the problem and solve from there? And people didn't want to hear it. And that's been a challenge throughout my career, especially doing strategic change transformations. A piece of advice I got from a mentor while I was at Gap Inc., because I was struggling with this, right? I was being asked to be edited. And she said, you can only change who you are by a couple of degrees. And yes, you need to think about how you're showing up in the room, because ultimately what you want is for people to hear you. So you do need to edit in such a way that your message is being received, but also recognize that you can't be that different than who you are. So for so much of my career, I have felt like an outlier, a square peg in a round hole. And by nature of the roles I had too, right? I always sat in, these more centralized roles. But I will tell you that now I don't feel that way at all. I feel like I completely fit.
Before we began the podcast, I told Shannon I'd wanted her to go deep into specific life moments. And she immediately said, hey, I'm not great at that. And who is? I think anytime you ask someone to go that deep, there's a slight shift in the room, like you're stepping closer to something more vulnerable. So maybe this was the moment I was most careful about, because I wanted to handle what comes next with care, what it actually feels like to carry something like this day to day without flattening it or rushing past it. I hope I did it justice and gave it the space it deserves.
You talk about how every day you wake up and you're reminded that your brain is wired different. What was it like today waking up? Were you in a brain fog? Was it a good day? Yeah. No. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I received devastating news yesterday related to my book, and I have had to work very hard last night and today to stay focused. One of the things that does come with the way my brain is wired is ruminating. Mm-hmm. Going over something over and over and over again, in particular if it's something that needs to be solved. I am a fixer. That has nothing to do with with my diagnosis, but when I'm searching for a fix, I will be obsessive in that thinking. So I worked really hard yesterday to stay in the present, and today to say I just need to put one foot in front of the other. Now, that might not have anything to do with my condition, right? I think anybody would be there, but where I do see differences, be it the situation that happened yesterday or other ones, is to the degree in which I react. And this comes back to, I have these high highs. And when I say high highs, it's just that I get super excited and I'm so happy for somebody, right? And I'm very emotive and brewing with joy for people, or even my own self if something exciting has happened. But I feel the disappointments very deeply, and it is much harder for me to move on. I also wanted to share something though with you. I've had a rough couple of weeks. And last week I had days of migraines, and I think it's my body saying I need to shut down. I am working the hardest I've ever worked. I am the most stressed I've ever been. I am the poorest by the second, and I am the most fulfilled. I wouldn't change any of it for all the tea in China. But I decided today that I need to take a week off, that my mental health is, I am too scattered. I am too strained. I am not showing up in the way that I want to. I am not focused enough. And the week off is not a week off of not working. It's a week off so I can work uninterrupted. A week with no meetings that I can catch up on the 75 things that I need to do. Because I live in a world that I see every to do, and it's as if they're all 1,000 of them needing to be done right now. And that includes personal and professional. So I haven't blocked the calendar yet, but I just committed this morning that I have to do it. And even though it'll take me a week out of running Retail Women in Tech and a week out of getting the book ready. In the long run, it's what will be best for everybody, not just myself.
Sometimes I do, even in this solopreneur world, still feel like I'm burning the midnight oil. You
I
know, it does feel different. And I don't know how to explain it to people. It's mine, it's something I'm putting into work, but you almost have to save yourself from yourself. And I'm so glad that you are in
Well,
that case.
and to that point is that what I've recognized is I'm carrying so much. And so allowing things to flow and move through me and bringing more Zen principles into my daily life has been completely thrown out the window because these are my babies.
Right, right,
I
right.
wake up and I think about them. When I go to bed, I think about these two aspects of my life. And just like with my own babies, I can't squeeze them to, right? And there, I was trying to think, there's metaphors, right? The more you hold on to that baby bird, right, the more likely you are to kill it. And so I'm at that place of like trying to keep everything together and hold on to everything. And in the process, could potentially hurt everybody more and myself more by not letting go. It is in 20 billion times harder to do that when it's your own thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's
Yes.
one of the things that I've struggled with as well is I always had really, and this isn't about mental health, by the way. These are now universal, I think, experiences or ones many people can relate to. But I always had great boundaries between home and work. Excellent boundaries. I rarely worked after I got home. I never worked weekends. Like I can't tell you a weekend I ever worked. And I had a very successful career.
Yeah.
Now that I'm in this world, and this has been a topic for almost a year in my personal life, is that I don't have the boundary. And that's part of now what I think is now transpiring, right? But that's had the consequence of not creating space and being present for those that are in my life outside of what I do every day. So I think coupled with the thread maybe I would pull as it relates to mental health in this is the intensity in which I approach my work. That is actively something that I continue to have to work on. And I know I'm not alone for those of us who've decided to go out on our own.
I you're definitely not alone, but it's those moments when you just picked yourself up, you had a shit day that you were just like, I can't believe I made this meeting or did this presentation after what happened earlier that morning.
More than I could ever count. I mean, I couldn't, I know that, no, I can't, more than I could ever count. Even today, being candid, I do try to share with people the reality. I was just talking to somebody about it this weekend that we have this tradition to ask people how they are. Do people really want to know how we are? And I always struggle to lie. I don't want to lie. Like if I'm having a shitty day, I want to say I'm not doing great.
Yeah.
Right? I usually commit to telling the truth about it. What I don't tell the truth about is when I'm struggling with depression, when I'm barely able to get out of bed
Right.
and I'm barely able to get through the meeting because I'm in physical pain and I'm incredibly high functioning, right? I don't check out, but I never say I'm really, really depressed today.
Right. And I feel like it's those closest, that person saying you can only edit to a few degrees, your ex-husband, your current fiance, they can maybe tell, but how does an outsider tell?
I have wondered if um, because of running the nonprofit now, and right, it's 100% volunteer led, and I have this incredible 14-person leadership team who sees me because for once I finally found my space that I fit. So I don't know if maybe they see more of it because I'm showing up as my true self. Now I might not be honest about where I am, but they might be able to see when I'm much more like on fire and when I'm quieter
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's typically that I retreat and I'm less intense when I'm down. So I suspect they might see it more, not just because maybe they know. And not all of them do. They didn't all go to the session. So not all of them do know. I haven't had that on an agenda item to talk about. But I wonder if they see that the fluctuation in moods more. than
Right.
anybody else has before.
You also talked about earlier how HR was like, hey, I don't know if we can open up this can of worms by you sharing this mental health story. So now I'm thinking, do you think that corporate can create an environment where somebody like you can thrive consistent?
Yes, where my hope lies is this shift in generational
Mm,
acceptance,
yeah.
right? If we're really honest, right, the greatest generation who you arguably went through the greatest trauma, when you think about the depression and the wars, etc., they spoke of nothing.
Mhm.
Boomers started to, but hid it. But it was during their time that this idea of self-actualization, right, the yes movement, I think it was called, started to become part of the social consciousness, but still very quiet. Us Gen Xers, which you are not one, so I say us Gen Xers to the audience, we did start to talk about these things, right? We're the first generation to talk about perimenopause in the way that it is, right? We are coming out and sharing these stories, but we're just becoming the senior leaders in companies, and we're not all designed like that, right? It's not as and I'm going to use this word in a positive way, as pervasive as it is with millennials. And us Gen Xers are a pretty small population, right? Our influence isn't going to be as great. But you think about how millennials think about it, and in particular Gen Z, and I have three of those, there is no stigma, right? It is widely talked about. And part of the reason why I believe that's the case, not just because we've opened the aperture just as a society in general, and we have more role models now, right? We have like the Simone Biles tapping out for a little bit, right? We have so many examples of um, uh, celebrities, Selena Gomez, right? Her story talking about it. But that Gen Z group also went through a trauma together and with COVID. So I am optimistic and hopeful that we will be creating conditions so that people can show up as their true selves, and that we understand as leaders how to harness all of this incredible power rather than try to throttle it.
I do think the door has been closed. I remember in COVID, people could realize just how much I did for my brother, to have to feed him, to do all these things. They didn't know what to do about it, you know?
And
And I
the issue.
think that was paralyzing. They could be empathetic about it, but the work still needed to get done. They were like, well, I have these business goals. I understand you're dealing with that in your life, but I have these business goals. And so it was very interesting reconciling both of those things. Can we, as business with hard business goals, with board advisors, with investors to meet, actually be empathetic? It's a hard thing to swallow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely, to be honest, it's a rewiring of the way we think about getting work done and the integration of the lives that we have outside of work. So I completely hear you. And I think that's where the challenges have lied with being able to talk about mental health and creating accommodations, even if they're required. But I never check that I have a qualifying condition ever,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Even if discrimination's not supposed to happen, right? I don't take that risk. But nobody knows what, to your point, nobody knows what to do with it.
Yes. Yeah. Which
And
is so funny because
it is like trying to put a square peg in a round hole, right? Because we don't have the culture, we don't have the norms, right? We don't have the infrastructure to be able to have this kind of way of operating and living succeed in not just corporate America, right? Even worse in frontline workers' jobs, or factory workers' jobs. It's even worse than it
yeah.
is in corporate America.
It saddens me a little bit at times because for me is that at the end of the day is because they don't see the ROI of people, right? Because how can we be so masterful at business execution, but then paralyzed by people execution? There has to be like a lack of investment there because they don't see a return. That's why I think your point about Gen Z coming in and the people actually changing. If those people in actual leadership positions actually see ROI and taking care of it, people, then things change a little bit.
I
The
completely
equation, yeah, the
perfectly
equation.
said.
Yeah, the equation changes. I hope that is the case. I love that you're saying that the movement, has increasingly started because sometimes you forget, right? We ascribe this all to Gen Z, but with each generation, everyone has become a little bit more open and the conditions have been better for people to thrive. I just keep thinking of that layoff conversation that you had when all of a sudden you're just like, ooh, am I being filtered through this?
Yes. And I do believe I was. I want to tell you my dream scenario.
Yeah.
And this is something that we discussed many years ago when we were sharing our stories.
Yeah.
And it happened to happen to the gentleman I was saying who inspired me to come out. He had dislocated his shoulder. I believe that's in a skiing accident. And it wasn't one that you could just pop back in, right? It was a pretty serious injury. Could have been something more. Well, he could openly discuss that at work. He could talk about his pain. He could take doctor's appointments. There was, sympathy and empathy for what he was going through, accommodations made, etc. I could never talk about that if I was having a down day. And we still can't, right? People still can't talk about the fact that they're going to do a therapy appointment, right? They still can't say, I'm having a really rough day today, right? My anxiety is through the roof, or I tried a new medication and my brain is like all over the place, right? I dream of a world where we can be honest about taking that time for ourselves, just like we do for physical conditions. We create space for people when they have cancer. We understand, right? And when we get to a place that there is not shame like diabetes, we don't judge people for diabetes type 1. They're born with it. And I dream of a place where we, those of us who have it, accept it as much as somebody who has diabetes type. No one judges them for taking medication. And we are raised in a world that we're trying to get off our medications and that medications are bad and only if you absolutely need them. I hope to be alive to see some of these changes, but I think that we're still pretty far away from those happening, to be quite honest.
You talked about how maybe it's going to take a few generations for things to sustainably change, but you're starting your own thing and leading the way, And I'm curious, tell me about RWIT and how you are building, systems and infrastructure so more like you can show up in an authentic way.
With Retail Women in Tech, which by the way, we're not just tech, right? We are servicing all of these populations in our industry that had no place for community. That's starting for those in college, those that are in retail, tech, media, et cetera, right? Said another way, one-to-one connections are a superpower. We believe one story can change a life. Happened to me. It happens to, the conversation I just had with somebody yesterday, even though it wasn't good, just changed the trajectory of my life. We also believe in giving and getting back. And that then translates to, we focus on people, not profiles, and we bring our whole selves. This isn't about the shiny spots. And we honor every season. As a result of that, right, we foster the spaces for people to be themselves. And that's also a reflection of who I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When you are a founder, which has taken me quite a while to actually accept and then appreciate that the reason why that is the case and the reason why we don't do any exclusive events is because exclusivity gives me the ick, right? That is handed down to the community.
Are there any things that you have in infrastructure right now within RWIT that make it so somebody can show up better? Are you starting meetings differently? Is it the people you're choosing?
I'll give you one little example. Every other Friday, we have Shoot the Shit Fridays. No agenda. People just show up and talk about whatever, right? And so that's one small example.
It's your DNA. It's not, few things you add on. It is RWIT.
Yeah.
In so many ways. Because we talked about how your mental health diagnosis shows up, lack of focus, listening. What bothers you the most? I'll tell you, for me, I'm a perfectionist to the end of degree. I think it's a superpower, but it's also paralyzing and it annoys me. And sometimes I will include mistakes on a post because I'm forcing myself to accept that perfection is okay. Lack of perfection is okay. So for you, out of all the things, the symptoms that show up in your mental health diagnosis, what do you feel most blessed by?
Well, one, I am not a perfectionist in any way, shape, or form. I'm an 80%er, and those who are perfectionists find it infuriating to be with.
I am
Yeah.
obsessed with my 80%er friend. She is living the best life.
Oh, it is a lot easier. I
Yeah.
will tell you. So I'm winning in that one. The greatest strength is my ability to see how things relate and to pull things together, right? I can, I'm highly intuitive. I can see A to Z in a second. I live in a world of causality, and that's part of what makes somebody very intuitive, right? You can see something and do, frankly, the math, even though I suck at math, but do the math of how things are going to play out in, a variety of scenarios very quickly. What I hate is my life is hard. My life is hard for me. My life is not hard, but life is hard for me. And I always have drama. I joked for decades that my life is like Days of Our Lives. You know who's the common thread? Me. Me. Now, I still don't really understand why that's the case. We talked about I have lots of stories, and I do. So that's the benefit, I guess, of that being the case. But frankly, said another way, is how intensely I feel the downs and the disappointments and the frustrations, that all the work that needs to get done, right? The lack of patience that I have, how much frustration gets in my way, that it's great that I can feel all the great emotions strongly, but I feel all the negative ones equally as strongly. And that's what makes life feel hard.
One question before you leave. We talked about some of the labels that people used for you before. Hey, maybe you're too much. You don't listen. You lack focus. These labels that come with a health diagnosis of being bipolar. How would you relabel those?
Boy, that's a tough question. I don't have an answer off the top of my head. So I'm gonna reverse it, that I think it's about knowing who you are, right?
I always think about that degrees comment. It's like, if we can't materially change this about ourselves, how then do we relabel it and reharness it? I don't want people to feel not empowered by who they are at any point. Shannon, this is only tipping the surface of what we can talk about here. I'm so excited to have you again. Where can people find you?
Shocker, LinkedIn. Shannon E. Flanagan. And then do follow us at Retail Women in Tech, retailwomenintech.org. We are a no paywall organization. We do not believe access should cost money. Check us out, join us, follow us, and stay tuned for Choose, Don't Chase Your Career, Rewrite Your Transitions on Your Own Terms, a collection of stories inspired by not only my own journey, but in particular, the journey of so many women that I've gotten to meet over the years.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
The thing about Shannon's story is it doesn't resolve itself neatly. And maybe that's the point. It's something worth staying close to anyway.
I have been told this for most of my life, is that I'm too much.
Oof, I've heard that one. We're not for everyone. It's okay.
We're not forever.